in situations where I was like, okay, this is not good. My husband and I are coming to a point where we're talking about separating. I'm working and pretending at work like everything is fine and it's not. So it was a lot of cracks that were starting to break open even wider. And I really had to once again come to my knees and just say, okay, Lord, what is going on here? I'm married. A lot of things I prayed for, they've happened, all these things. But what I realized, Christina, was my achievements did not equal me being healed.
Welcome to the All Things Beloved podcast with me, Christina Patterson, where we speak with real women about real faith in a real God. This is a safe place to have honest conversations about faith, life, relationships, purpose, and well, all things beloved. Thank you so much for joining today's conversation. Be sure to share with a friend and enjoy the show. I am so excited about today's guest. I was on her podcast just a little while ago, and I'm so excited to share what she has to teach us on the All Things Beloved podcast today. Her name is Latasha Ferguson, and she is a speaker, writer, podcaster, and coach. She is passionate about empowering others to do the heart work so they can live and lead from the inside out. She is a passionate educator who has spent 18 years serving in the roles of teacher, assistant principal, and now director of instruction. She has also served as an associate pastor for almost a decade. Wife to her best friend and mom to 4 beautiful girls, Latasha loves to run, read, spend time at the beach, and travel in search of great foods that hugs her belly. Yes, to great food.
yes to that.
Latasha, so that is your official bio, but will you tell us just in your own words who you are and what you do?
So yeah, you've given a synopsis there, Christina. And first, thank you for allowing me to be here. When you came on my podcast, it was just I got so much good feedback and people loved it. We had such a great conversation. It probably could have lasted like 5 hours. So thank you for having me here. I am a mom and we live in sunny Orlando, been married to my husband for, it's like 16 years now. We're a blended family. So had my 2 girls, my oldest that are grown and out of the house. So yes, moms who are listening, they do get grown eventually and they do leave. And so I'm like a 50% empty nester is what I'm calling it. And then I have 2 younger ones. One's 14 and the other one is about to be 8, but she's the boss of them all, of all the girls. So with having 4 girls, it's extra spicy around here and gotta love my husband. So we don't have any boys. So we did recently get a boy pup.
Okay.
We have a new Boston Terrier. That's a whole adventure. And I will not go into that because it will take up the whole podcast time. He'll be a year in May and a lot of energy and a lot of things. I didn't have a dog when I was growing up. So this is a new adventure, but my husband got his boy as a dog. So that's our household, lively. And I have a grandson. My oldest has a boy. And so I'm a Lolly to Jaden. He's like, yeah, I didn't want to be granny. I didn't want to be grandma. I kind of wrestled with those names. So I'm Lolly and my husband is Pops. And so he's 18 months and full of life.
Yes.
So my husband's kind of getting evened out then. So, it's like 4 girls and now he's got a grandson and a boy pup. So 3 and 4. Yeah. Lots of fun in our household.
That is so
Yeah. So that's a little bit personal. Yeah. I've been in education, like you said, and I'm a podcaster and a speaker and a writer. And I just really love encouraging women because of what I've been through and what God has brought me through. I will holler from the mountaintops until I leave this earth about being able to have a redeemed life and God's redemptive power and who he is and being able to rewrite our stories and that it's not too late to be who God has called us to be.
I love that. And I was sharing that I was on your podcast earlier. Your podcast is called Overcome to Become, which you just gave us a little bit of light into that title. But can you give us more specifically why you titled your podcast Overcome to Become?
Yeah. So I was a little bit of a strong-willed. It was actually leadership that was popping up, Christina, when I was little. But, it was, my grandma would have said hard-headed.
You're not
child.
you're just a leader.
Leader. Yes. Yes. So you have one of those? You have
Yep.
one? Yes, I have a couple. And so, really went through some things, kind of a rebellious stage when I was growing up. And in my teenage years, I had this dream of what I wanted my life to be like, out of high school. I think all of us have that, what we want to do when we grow up, go to college, get this career, all these other things. And what really put a pivot in all of that, I met this guy in high school, and he was kind of like fit the bad boy kind of persona. I was a good girl and didn't want to listen to my parents, and I was determined to be in this relationship, not knowing that that would be something that would really shift the trajectory of what I wanted to do after high school. And so I got into this relationship against my parents' blessing.
Okay.
And long story short, was in it for a few years and ended up having my oldest daughter my senior year of high school. And
Okay.
so that was a shock, a huge shock. I grew up in the church, was a PK for a while. For those of you who don't know, that is a preacher's kid. This is like a least likely scenario. So there I was, a senior in high school, planning to go to college. And now I had my oldest daughter. And that really shifted a lot of things and had me to experience some things that I never thought I'd have to experience. And so there was a single mom graduating high school, and it was, okay, how am I going to go to college now? What am I going to do? And so from there, ended up having to go on welfare and tried to make things work in that relationship. And it ended, it was a toxic relationship and just ended pretty poorly. By the time it ended, I was midway through my college years, had two kids at the time.
Okay.
And it was, for me, we got into this situation where I knew the relationship was over, but I was trying to hang on to something and make something happen that I probably should have never entangled with myself with to begin with, right? But there I was, strong-willed and trying to make it work.
I've been there.
And had the situation where literally, like they say, having the movie sometimes where you have this out of body experience, where
Mhm.
I had this altercation. And I remember driving home in my car, crying. And I just heard the Spirit of the Lord just say, "Are you done? Are you finished? Are you done?" And I knew what he meant by done. Really, are you going to surrender finally? Right? And for me at that moment, realizing God had been chasing me all this time, his love, not
Mhm.
his judgment, but his love had been chasing me all these years, saying, "Come on, Tosh, right? Like, you can just surrender. You can have the life, even better life than what you imagine, if you would let go, if you would let
Mhm.
go of control, and instead of trying to make things what you want them to be." And this relationship was an example of that.
Right.
Trying to control something and make it be, prove people wrong, and then make it be what I wanted it to be.
Mhm.
And so at that point, at my lowest point I felt in my life, now with two kids in college, working, trying to make ends meet, again, in a place I never imagined, I found myself opening up my hands and my heart and just saying, "Okay, Lord, what do you want to do with what I felt was a mess of my life?"
Yeah.
I thought, okay, now I've really had to come and look at myself and say, "You have made a mess of your life through your choices, through your own choices. You've brought yourself to this place," right? Yeah, I could blame other people and say somebody wasn't treating me right and all this, but you have made, these choices have led you here.
Mm.
And so at that point, I really felt so many different things, but really at my wits' end, at the end of myself, which now looking back was a good thing,
Yeah.
to come to the end of myself. And I really, thinking about it now, that's really when, even though I knew of God, when I really fell in love with him.
Mm.
Because at the point where him of all people could have been like, "I told you so.
Mhm.
You should have listened. Look at what a mess you've made of your life. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. You'll never be anything. I mean, just look. It's a mess. It's a mess." Instead, I just kept hearing him nudge me and call me and say, "Just give it to me. Give me all the broken pieces. Give me all of the weariness. Give me all of the trying to do it on your own, trying to make this relationship work, trying to make your life look like it was a certain way. And it really was not even that. It was all pretend. Give it to me." Right. And then I can do something with your life more than what you can imagine. And so that started me on a journey of learning how to surrender to God and the joy and peace and how we really find ourselves. That's how we find ourselves, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we look other places, we try 7 steps over here and do all these things, but really the only place we're going to find ourselves is in God. And that's what one of the lessons I learned is in Him. And so that, even though from the outside, I mean, my situation statistically, I mean, I probably should not even be where I am right now, being a teen single mom like that. But giving God those broken pieces, I saw Him really take those pieces and create the story that I have right now, which is beyond anything that I could have ever put together myself if I would have had total control over it and worked the pieces like I wanted to. It still would not have turned out the way it has now. And so
Mm.
that title, Overcome to Become, I realized I lived in some bitterness for a while, having to go through those things. I thought, oh God, I'm a good person. Why do I have to go through this? I try to do this. I'm trying to get my life together and I'm still struggling. I'm all of these things. I've asked for your forgiveness. I'm still struggling. I don't understand. And so now I realize that title came from me realizing that sometimes we need to go through things in order to become who God has called us to be. Sometimes we pray, and in our prayers, and I've been guilty of this, we pray, Lord, please take it away, take it far, far away. I can't deal with this. And we think God's answer to our prayers is to take it away from us, to snap His fingers and say, okay, you're going to go from point A to point B. And it's done, right? It's done. But really, it's God allowing us to go through using that. He doesn't cause it, but using what we're dealing with and taking us with hand in hand, partnering with us through those seasons of our life, even if we've made them hard for ourselves, right? Partnering with us. And then as we're doing that, we're shedding off the old and becoming new. And it's a necessary process, is what I've had to make peace with. It's a necessary process, and it's one that's necessary to become who God has called us to be. And so that bitterness has now turned to joy. But Christina, I struggled with that for a while, that whole overcoming process. And so thankfully, God has shed some light through going through those seasons of what it really is and why it's necessary.
Right, right. And I think that's just a beautiful testament of how gracious and loving our God truly is. I mean, I have a very similar story about just being in a moment where God could have rejected me, because that's what I did to Him. He could have turned His back on me, and instead He just showed me His just unfailing love when I deserved it the least. And that's actually the story behind our title, Beloved Women. We're not going to get in it today because that's a whole nother podcast. We'll be here for a whole nother hour. But I love that you were able to receive God's love in that season to truly transform you to become the woman you are now. And I want to know, what was the process like, though, however, not only receiving God's love, but actually showing it to yourself, like forgiving yourself? Because it seemed like when you were talking about your story, there was a lot of self-condemnation. Like, you made these decisions and you kind of put yourself in this pit. You did express that, okay, I'm going to own up to some of the choices I made. But how did you move from a condemning, unforgiving spirit towards yourself to actually treating yourself the way that God was treating you, so that you could become, which was loving and gracious and forgiving?
Oh gosh, that process has been tangly. It hasn't been a straight, like, okay, step one, do this, and then it was all resolved and it would go away. But it's years of processing. One, it's owning up to it, right? So it's looking in that mirror, which is so hard to do. Looking in the mirror, you know, the word of God really does do what it says it does. It really does go into the deepest parts of us, and it really does examine us when we read it and we take it in. And like it says, it goes down to the bone and to the marrow. It really does lay us exposed
Yeah.
to who we really are. And it's not an easy process, but it's a necessary one. And so for me, it was years of realizing, and thankfully, with God being so gentle and gracious, He doesn't show us all of ourselves at once, because we would not be able to handle it.
Right.
But in doses, thankfully, and sometimes for me in quarter of the doses. of showing us through different situations how we are. And sometimes for me, I felt like I had gotten over things or I was okay, that I was loving myself more or I had forgiven myself. And then realizing, oh no, I had not. And so probably the biggest aha for me was I'm a big, huge believer in therapy in counseling. And a few years back, it came to a point where I knew, yes, I was praying and I was reading, I was going to the church, I was doing all those things, being in community, but there were still some things that were bubbling up, bubbling up,
Yeah.
bubbling up. And it wouldn't be always. It would be, of course, Christina, like at the most inconvenient times.
Right.
Sometimes humiliation would follow. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like that came out. Or I reacted in that way. And I remember my husband saying, hey, in his ever so, God love her husband's gingerly way, he was like, hey, maybe you want to talk to somebody or speak to somebody. He was all over eggshells, trying not to say, you need to go to counseling. And so at first, I wanted to be offended. And then I thought, okay, Lord, no, he had been pressing on my heart anyways. You need to
Right.
speak to somebody, right? Find a counselor who is a Christian based counselor that can relate to the word, but also relate and tell you about yourself mentally and what's going on and why you still feel so tangly so many years later and you're still wrestling with it. And
Okay.
so when I went to counseling, went through some sessions, and I mean, God has really gifted those therapists in a way that I didn't even imagine, because again, I thought I was fine.
Yeah.
And I remember going into a session and she had this chair in front, and I remember going in there thinking like, what are we going to do today? And she's like, hey, I want you to sit down and we're going to have this exercise, and I want you to look at the chair, and I want you to pretend that that's you when you were 17.
Mm.
And I could feel myself getting kind of like, walls up, like, this is silly. I don't want to do this. But that's how I knew I needed it. And so she's like, you're 17 and we've been talking these weeks. And what I've realized through conversation is that you have not forgiven yourself.
Mm.
So I was like, yeah, but I have forgiven. I've forgiven. Right. And she's like, oh, no, you've forgiven other people. Like, she's like, you've released them and let them go, but you still have yourself hostage.
Oof.
And so I was like, and I want her to explain, like, what do you mean by that? I don't know. And she's like, all of the overworking, the overachieving, the
Mhm.
proving, all of those things. She was like, you're still kind of upset with your 17-year-old self about the decisions that she made when she made them. You still feel like she kind of ruined your life a little bit and she took away your dreams. And so she's like, I want you to sit here and I want you to talk to her and tell her everything, all your disappointments, your hurts, your everything. And then I want you to forgive her.
Mm.
And so I think I was maybe 4 words in,
Mhm.
and the big ugly cry came out.
I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming.
Oh, I was like 4 or 5 words in, and it was, and she was like, just tell her everything, tell her you're disappointed, tell her you're upset. Like, you knew better. Why did you make I mean, and I was just saying all of these things. And then it just came to a point at the end where I just remember telling my 17-year-old self, you did the best that you could with what you knew how to do, what you did. You made the decisions you knew how with the tools you had. You did the best you could at that moment. You tried. Now you know better. You did not know better then, but
Right.
now you do. And so that for me was like a breaking that I needed, a release that I did not know I really needed. And I think for those who are listening that are personality wise, the achievers, the like, you like to get things done, you like things to be a certain way, and you are good at checking off boxes and go when things don't go the way you want, especially if it's a decision you've made and maybe you failed in a way.
Yeah.
We can be so hard on ourselves, harder than anyone else
Yep.
on ourselves. And we got to make sure we process through that. We have to make sure we process through that and give ourselves a break. And I didn't realize for all those years I've been holding my breath, right? Holding my breath and even almost not even allowing myself, Christina, to be fully happy. Even though I had accomplished and gotten some of the things and checked off boxes and prayers answered,
Yeah.
now I realize I was still holding my breath a little bit And I was still kind of living a little bit in what my life could have been if
Mm,
I had not made certain decisions, if I had not met that person, if I had not done this, and
yeah.
still holding on to that. But I did not know I was holding on to that until she helped walk me through that. And I thought, oh my goodness, even physically, it gave me a release
Yeah.
that I didn't know I needed. And so it's a process. Every once in a while, those thoughts will still come. Like,
Mhm.
okay, it's when I'm in a hard time, in a hard season or something, and it
Yeah.
will come like, okay, Tosh, you did this. This is, this. And so I still have to contend with it every
Mm.
once in a while. But now I know how to contend with it with the word, through prayer, through reminding my mind and the enemy and anything else that tries to come. I'm free, right?
Yes.
I am free. I've
Yes.
forgiven myself. God has forgiven me. And then just continue with that. But I even had to give myself grace learn how to give myself grace, really. So
Yeah.
it's been a process.
Yeah, that is so powerful. I've had a similar experience with myself and having to realize that I was judging my past self like she was my present self. And realize
Mhm.
that 18-year-old girl couldn't even think straight. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if there was an 18-year-old girl right now that made the same decisions that I made, I would be like, girl, okay, you're doing this because this happened and you're operating out of fear and brokenness. And you can't see that when you're in it.
True.
I really had to shift how I looked at my past self. Like, she was a 18-year-old broken girl that was, like you said, doing the best that she could. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? And so, like, why am I being so hard on her? My 30 something year old self being so hard on her and so mean to her. I would never do that to like a real 18-year-old girl right in front of
That's
me.
so true.
Because I
Yes.
would understand the maturity difference between us. But because
Exactly.
it was myself, I was judging my 18-year-old Christina like she was 36-year-old Christina. And
Exactly.
she
Mm-mm.
wasn't. And I had to separate that in my head so that
Yeah.
I could really look at her with compassion and be like, oh my goodness, you were broken. You really needed help. You needed guidance. And I forgive you. Because
Exactly.
you kept going anyways, so that I could be here today, regardless if it looks like
Yes.
or not.
Celebrate that part, right?
You're
Like I get
still here because
yes.
of that past self, regardless of how many mistakes she made.
Yes. 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 Yeah. You got up and you kept trying
Yes.
and you kept going,
I kept
all of those
stumbling
different things. Yeah.
and crawling.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So I love that. And I hope that our listeners are encouraged to look back on their past selves with the forgiveness that God has for them.
Mhm.
Because we're doing what we can with what we know in that season. And you know better now. So you're doing better. And back then you didn't. And you can become a better
Yes.
person as you overcome those challenges of your past. I absolutely love that. I know that you also coach women to do what you call heart work so that they
Mhm.
can live and lead from the inside out. Can you tell
Yes.
us what that means and what is required to do that?
So, going back to my journey a little bit, along the way, I was dealing with some brokenness and learning about surrender along the way. And all the while checking goals, finished my degree, did all of those different things. Still had some things I had not processed. And once I got into my career and then into leadership and started leading adults and other people, some of that stuff started bubbling up again, where I saw myself acting in ways or thinking of things, perceiving things in ways that I thought, okay, this is coming from somewhere. And it really came to a point where I was on my leadership journey, climbing the ladder and all of that, and was having some things at home that I was dealing with in my marriage, kind of falling apart. But I was keeping things from the outside. It looked like it was perfect. Nothing was wrong. And I came to a point, another kind of aha point, pivot, where it was like, you need to shift. You got to start dealing with this. You have packed down. I kind of almost see it like a chest, where we have a chest and we can pack things in there. And the first few things we put in there, it's not too packed. It's fine. We can close it and pretend it's not, like it's there. Right. We can put a few more things in there, a few more things until the stuff rises to the top. And that stuff being our issues, right? Unhealed hurts, wounds, other things that we've gone through that society has told us, oh, you just get over it, right? Like time heals it, all those things. That's not true.
Right.
But we pack it away in a chest, but eventually that chest gets too big. I mean, and well, not too big. The stuff we put in is too much and it can't hold it. And now it's overflowing. And that overflow is going into our family. If you're a leader, it's going into the people you lead. You're a parent, it's flowing out into your children, et cetera. Right. And so for me, that chest started showing. Those skeletons started dancing out of the closet a little bit in situations where I was like, okay, this is not good. My husband and I are coming to a point where we're talking about separating. I'm working and pretending at work like everything is fine and it's not. So it was a lot of cracks that were starting to break open even wider. And I really had to once again come to my knees and just say, okay, Lord, what is going on here? I'm married. A lot of things I prayed for, they've happened, all these things. But what I realized, Christina, was my achievements did not equal me being healed. Things that I wanted, things that I got, homes that we bought did not equate to me being healed on the inside totally. So that stuff still had to be dealt with. And so then that's where the doing the heart work comes in, because I really believe that the Lord desires for us to be our authentic self as much as we can. And we're living in a world that really praises, hey, be whatever you can be on the outside for everybody to see, never mind what's going on in the inside. And if we just look around and turn on the news just for 5-10 minutes or scroll through our phones, we see leaders falling, great leaders falling, not just in the church, but also in the public sector, the private sector, and people falling. And so for me, it's really put an ache in my heart, especially for women who are leading or aspiring leaders, to say, hey, before you start leading other people, you got to lead yourself well, right? You got to look back inward to be a good leader. How am I leading myself well? And that starts with doing that heart work, with looking inward and saying, okay, as God shows us those things about ourselves little by little, and it bubbles up, not pressing it back down and saying, oh, well, that's because that person is not acting right. And that's why I responded that way, or that's because he should just do what he needs to do. And then I wouldn't have to say that. But really, it's not about that person. It's about you. So flipping it back, which is hard work to do. It's hard. We're busy. It's not comfortable.
It's easier to point the finger.
Yes, it's easier to point the finger. It's easier to be like, oh, let me talk about all the problems my neighbors have, because it distracts us, right? And then we don't have to look at ourselves. So for me, it's a mission to really help women who are aspiring to be leaders, whether in their home, whether it is out in their jobs, to really do that work so they can have a firm foundation and not be perfect. That's not the goal, because we will never be perfect, but to be the best to lead yourself well first, and then to be able to lead others, to be authentic. Yeah, to be authentic. And so that's been the goal. And that's helping people to just really look inward little by little and deal with those things, so that they then can lead others better.
Yeah. And with Instagram and filters and just social media, it's so much easier for us to put on that facade, like everything is okay, and present ourselves in a way that's not authentic when we really are broken down on the inside. And you can lie to the world, you can lie to yourself, you can start believing those lies.
True.
God knows the truth though.
Yes.
But I think that there's a certain level of shame that causes us to want to keep putting those faces on when it looks like everybody else got it together. You know what I mean? So we don't want to be the only one to be like, oh, wait a minute, hold on, me and my husband struggling. Oh, wait a minute.
Exactly.
Don't forgive myself. Oh, wait a minute. I don't forgive that person from my past, or I had childhood, And so how do you often find yourself encouraging women to overcome that initial shame of really living in your authentic self, so that you can do the heart work, to the first step, like admitting that I have a problem? Because that shame of being like, well, if I have a problem, does that mean I'm not worthy? Does that mean, and really trying to run from the lies that like I'm not valuable if my life isn't perfect. And so I'm ashamed to say all of the not so good things that I've done or have been done to me.
Yeah. So it is shame kept my mouth closed for a long time and really said, Oh God. And the more I achieved and at work and things, I mean, it had a hold on me even more to close my mouth because it was like, you better not tell people what you've been through, how you've really got here. They're going to think differently of you. They're
Yeah.
going to look at you different, right? You're going to be judged. I mean,
Right.
all of these things that shame tells us. But now I realize that the more I told my story, the more free I became. Actually, it's the
Yes.
opposite. It's the
Yes.
opposite. Not only that, but then it helps free other people. It's a twofold. So I tell people like when you tell your story, it frees you and it frees others, and it brings hope. Because when we don't share our story and we allow people to believe that we got to where we are because we followed all of the 10 commandments plus all of our lives, right? And that we did everything right in our parents' eyes and everybody's eyes along the way, it really robs people of hope. Because
Mhm.
let's be honest, none of us have a perfect past, perfect parents, perfect anything. There's issues everywhere, right? But when we come off in a way and we never let anyone in, and I'll say this too, to someone who's listening thinking like, so does that mean I have to go on social media or just stand in front of a crowd and tell all my business? No, that's not what.
Glad you clarified that. Thank you.
No, because I know somebody's like, oh no, I am not with that. No, and I'm not with that either, right?
Right, right.
So you do have to be wise. You do have to think to yourself, okay, you have to make sure you're ready to share. I always say the difference between a scab and a scar. If it's a scab, you probably want to be quiet until it heals totally so that you don't come out. Because when we look on social media, we can see a lot of scabs, a lot of places. Ooh, Christina, where people are lashing out and they're saying that they're telling their story or that they're trying to just encourage people, and it's not encouraging, right? And so we want to make sure that we're healed and that scar is going to remain. Of course, it's not going to go away, but it's evidence that we have healed and we have come through it. And now we can tell our story from a lens in a way that it's not going to hurt other people
I love
and it's
that.
going to bring them hope. So you start very practical way. You start, like you said, is being honest with yourself. I love journaling. I used to journal more, but I love journaling. And so, now you have a journal,
Yeah,
Christina,
yeah.
right?
Life Bible Journal.
Yes. And
I
so
think
plug there.
thank
Yes,
you.
there you go. Plug for Christina's journal. And so getting a journal like that and really having that first, being honest with yourself. Your first step doesn't need to be to go tell the world about
Right.
what happened. Really, it's about let me just talk this over with God. If therapy is you're still contemplating, you're like, well, I'm not all the way there yet with that or whatever, then okay, start with yourself and a cheap notebook or whatever and start writing down the things. Take it out of your brain and out of your heart onto paper and start doing that. And that's what I did, right? Before I could afford therapy or even was comfortable in going, that's
Right.
what I did was started journaling. And then from there, it's good because sometimes with the Bible, and I know you probably get this a lot, you open it up and people are like, oh, these and thous, and oh my
Yeah.
goodness,
Where do I
who begot this and begat that? I don't, where do I start? And so it's good to have like the life journal that Christina was talking about. It has, and the Bible app to
Yes.
help, which Christina has been on a couple times too.
Yeah.
And so having those things to guide you little by little along the way, if you're struggling with forgiveness, I believe our friend Kia Stevens has
Yes.
a forgiveness
Boot camp.
devotional. Yes.
Oh, yes. She has the
And yes, yes. And so she has that and a boot camp. And so little things like that. You're like, I'm struggling with forgiveness. So let me find something that I'm going to journal on it. And through that, you are doing that work privately because that's what matters the most, right? Doing that work privately before you then go and say things out publicly. And so, yeah, shame is going to try to get you to close your mouth. But when you're honest with yourself first, Then when you feel like you're at a point where you can share, then share. Some of us haven't even shared that much with the people we live with.
Yes.
Start there. Start
Yeah.
there. What are some things maybe with your spouse that you have not shared and now you're in a place where you feel like I need to share? Maybe some girlfriends, maybe it's a women's group at church or something like that that you can share with and start telling. And then from there, God will direct you from there who else to share with, or opportunities will come, because our story is our witness. When we think about sharing the gospel in our mind, sometimes we think about the old saints when they have the tracks, and we
Yeah.
love the old saints, bless their hearts. With the tracks, it was effective,
Yes.
going around knocking on doors. And let me tell you about Jesus. And that was their way and that time and season. And so if you're thinking, how can I share the gospel? And I don't want to just tell somebody, hey, do you know Jesus? Share your story. Share your
Yeah.
story.
Love
And God will make things available to us as we go throughout our day. We're at our jobs, at the PTA meeting, we're at a school activity where somebody will just start. It happened to me the other day. They'll just start talking, and you're like, whoa, this person's sharing a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
We just
So we just met. Okay. What is this? And so there it is, our opportunity to be like, oh, wow. Okay. I can relate. Let me share a little bit about what happened in my story. So again, little by little, like that. Doesn't have to be public on the social media, but at least work through that, because God wants to use your story to bring somebody else hope.
Yeah, and freedom. I love that. I love how, as we're honest about what we've been through, like the Bible says, the truth will set us free.
It
And so,
will.
as we overcome those lies of shame and the enemy and condemnation for believers in Christ who don't have to live condemned because we are free in
Mhm.
Christ, we can then offer that to other believers as well. I absolutely love that. Listen, Tasha, this has been an amazing conversation. And
Oh my goodness. Thank
you know me,
you.
you can talk for hours on end.
Oh, listen, we will be here till dinner time. And my
Yes.
husband will be like, who are
What's
you talking to?
what is going on? All right. So before we wrap up, do you have a final word of encouragement just for our beloved sisters about anything that we talked about today?
Oh, goodness. Just, I will say last words. You're not too old. It's not too late. Your past is not too messy. You
Yeah.
are not too far gone. Any of those TOOs, those
Yes.
twos, they get us all hung up. Start now. Whatever it is that God has placed in your heart to do, allow Him to do the work in you. You take the time to do the work so that you can become who God has called you to be. And that's the most important stuff. And then last thing I'll say is be gracious with yourself. Be gracious with yourself.
Yes. I absolutely love that. How can our beloved sisters connect with you outside of this podcast?
Okay, so all things on latashaferguson.com. She is getting a facelift at the
I
moment,
saw that.
but
I had to
she's
go to the Instagram page
oh, okay.
because the website had the coming soon.
Yes, yes. So she's getting a little bit of a facelift, but it should be done within the next week. But LatashaFerguson.com, you can find podcasts there, things there, a couple of lead magnets and freebies on there as well. All of those things on the website, or you can follow me on Instagram. I like to hang out there at Latasha M. Ferguson.
All right. So y'all go follow Latasha for more encouragement on how you can overcome to become, how to do the hard work so that you can live and lead from a place of grace and God's peace in true authenticity to who He is calling you to be. And thank you so much for setting that example for us in real life. Latasha, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Christina, for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Beloved, thank you so much for watching. Again, I will put all of the links to connect with Latasha in the description of this video. Please be sure to check her out. You will not regret it. Thank you so much for watching today. And until next time, be beautiful, be blessed, and be loved.